This is the video for problem 2 on the Core 2 quiz probability. Um, problem 2 says give the sample space for rolling a four-sided die. Quickly, four-sided die kind of looks like this. We're going to roll two of them. I'm going to call one of them green and one of them red. In the picture here, they're both green, but I couldn't find a red picture. You'll notice that there are four possibilities. You can get a 1, you can get a 2, you can get a 3, or you can get a 4. Okay. It's a four-sided die. You would expect to have four possible outcomes. So a sample space for one die is going to include those four possible outcomes. And when I do two dice, I'm going to need to include both possibilities. So I'll call this one my red die, just so I can distinguish between the two. And since I have two dice, I'm going to need a table. So we'll put the green die on the top. And I'll say 1 on my red die. I'll use a comma and then say 1 on my green die. I can also get 1 on my red die, 2 on my green die, 1 on my red die, 3 on my green die, and 1 on my red die, 4 on my green die. Then I'll consider the possibility that I get a 2 on the red die. I could also get a 1 on the green die, 2 on the red die, 2 on the green die, 2 on the red die, 3 on the green die, 2 on the red die, 4 on the green die. And same thing with 3. If I get 3 on the red die, I have the same four possibilities on the green die. And same thing with 4. And some of you might notice that looks similar to what I gave you for problems 3 and 4. 3, 4, 5, and 6 actually. I gave you a sample space with a red die, with a red die and a green die. Okay. But the green die in this case was 12-sided, so there are actually 12 spaces here instead of just 4. But if I had a four-sided die, my sample space would look like that.